What's up, guys? Welcome to the Wolf of Young Street podcast. My name is Victor. I'm your host. Today, my guest is Chandler Hack. He is a financial literacy consultant. But Chandler's story goes beyond budgeting and investing and retirement planning. Sure, we'll talk about those today. But in the second part of this interview, we're going to talk about Chandler's personal story with addiction. And yeah, you don't expect that kind of story from a guy in a suit and tie. But y'all know how much I love a candid story, don't you? Welcome to the show, Chandler. Thanks for taking the time with us today.
Victor, so good to see you, man. Appreciate you having me on. And again, looking forward to spending some time together and getting to know each other a little bit better.
Yeah. So I want to know about your story, though. I want to know how you got into this personal finance space.
Absolutely. So I'm actually originally from Saskatchewan, where the housing prices are about an eighth of the price. So I grew up in Saskatchewan probably first 25 years. Then it kind of came to the point where I never really saw myself leaving Saskatchewan, but it was time to try something new. So I moved here probably about 4 years ago. And originally I was more so in agriculture lending, then more into tech sales, things like that. And basically what happened was I moved out here, kind of COVID had hit as well. And I just didn't have the same love for the industry. Again, when you're kind of cold calling executives, doing different email campaigns, it's great when you have the camaraderie of being in an office. But when it's online, you're doing it at home alone, kind of someone picking up every 50 calls you make. It's pretty lonely. So I just didn't have the same passion anymore, and had a very good friend who was doing exceptionally well in the financial district here in Vancouver, and kind of said, hey, with your background and knowledge, you could certainly start with us part-time. Would be happy to give you a bit of a try. And that's what I did. And again, when all the tech layoffs came, it kind of gave me the opportunity to do something on my own, right? And I took it full time, and I certainly haven't looked back. I love it, and I'm here for the long term, right?
Right. I want to know about your journey. What do you regard as financial freedom, and how how have you set about planning that for yourself?
In my opinion, it's the ability to spend your time as you please, right? Not being dictated by, say, someone else's schedule, not having to ask for time off, I think would be a big one as well. To me, that's really what it comes down to. A lot of the time when people think of financial freedom, they think of retirement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to retirement, it's not always just an age. People are kind of eyeing their retirement date, looking at their pension. Hey, 2054 is my year. We're going off into the sunset, but it's generally more so comes down to ability to spend your time as you please. And of course, being in a position where you don't necessarily have to be working for money, right? You can kind of do what you want to do, spend your days as you please, right? Building your own schedule, really.
Right. So you kind of spoke earlier about how you got into this space of financial literacy, but I wanted to know sort of the educational background that sort of prepares you and qualifies you to kind of give advice in the way that you do, right?
Absolutely. So, as for kind of post-secondary, I did a double degree. So I did not only like commerce, like business administration, I did political science as well. But when it comes to licensing in the industry, I'm licensed not only in securities, but of course, obviously, like LLQP, which is your life license qualification program. So all the fun stuff, right? I mean, life, critical illness, disability, I mean, super visas, travel insurance, group benefits. So essentially, what you need to be able to give advice is you need to be licensed and, of course, recognized with specific regulators throughout specific provinces, right? So what it comes down to is, again, registering for these exams, being in good standing, of course, passing the exams and applying and being recognized with that specific province is really what it comes down to. But I did go to school. I studied quite a bit of finance post-secondary, but it's certainly not always a necessary qualification. I do know some people from interesting backgrounds that have do very well in the industry that come more so from even trades backgrounds, right? So it's one of those things you never really know where life's going to take you.
Yeah. So, and what is your approach to this financial literacy thing? Because I know there's the cheesy bit where people go online, that people are just online and be like, they're standing next to their airplane and they're like, "Oh, let me show you how I got this airplane, guy." And you're like, "All right, dude." You're like, "Okay, dude." So, so what is your
First,
approach to financial literacy?
First of all, I loved the voice. That's hilarious. And I mean, yeah, it just got me picturing like the kind of the influencer, right? They got their photos on their private jet. It's might just be a background or it's somewhere in a mall where everyone's paying $20 to take a picture, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
I've,
yeah,
I can't remember who it was, but an influencer, someone who's done very well in multiple businesses. I was listening to a podcast and they said the quickest way to turn someone off is taking a picture of yourself inside of a private jet.
yeah. I
So
know, right?
I think that's the thing for sure is you got to make sure you do a bit of research as well. We're not just consuming information blindly. Who is it that we're getting this information from, right? Have they done something specific in businesses? Have they had success in the past, or is their income kind of regenerating this information to you, right? So I think it's important it's a total blessing on what we have access to for information nowadays, but you need to do your homework, right? Everyone has an aunt who's sharing just obscene things on Facebook that is completely untrue, right?
Right.
So especially with a sensitive topic like something like personal finances, always make sure you do a bit of research and who is this source, right? Are they licensed? Are they allowed to be giving financial guidance or financial advice, right? What have they done in other areas of their life, right? Kind of seeing, of course, what qualifies them to be giving that advice, right?
Yeah, so I was asking specifically though about like what approach you take in terms of
Mm-hmm.
teaching people in order not to come off exactly the way I just portrayed for you, right? Like what approach do you take?
I think why it's gone so well is bringing the relationship back into it. Again, I think it's pretty easy to kind of bash branch level banking. It's very transactional, kind of puts you in something very low risk. And again, we'll see in 5 years if anything happens. Whereas for myself, I mean, I'm meeting with people over 3 to 4 sessions, 20 to 30 minutes at a time before even making recommendations, right? Going over those main fundamentals of building and protecting wealth. Of course, a brief intro on the banking system, classic money problems and goals. We'll go through the mindsets, fundamentals of investing, different forms of investments. Of course, the different registered accounts, the tax system specific to Canada. And then we'll do a bit of a wrap up and a review to make sure we're on the same page. And then we touch on the life and the protection aspect, right? The wealth protection. So I usually spend a couple hours with people kind of filling in the gaps, really getting to know what's important to them before even making recommendations, right?
Mm,
To me, in my practice, it's really about the relationship.
right. We've touched on a few things there. Obviously, at some point you mentioned life insurance. We've talked a little bit about financial freedom and planning and classic money mistakes. So we're going to go a little bit deeper here. What at the and I'm going to start with classic money mistakes, okay? Because I'm curious here. What are the most common mistakes, financial mistakes that you say you see people making, especially early on in their careers?
Oh, that's such a good one. It's instant gratification, right? People don't realize, and I'm sure you've realized this too. Once you kind of hit your 20s, the years start to go by a lot quicker, and I can imagine it's the same in the 40s and 50s, right?
Hmm.
So, instant gratification is probably the biggest mistake. People don't realize that they're going to be getting a little bit older, and they need to take care of themselves for tomorrow. They need to be planning towards their future and retirement. And really, what it comes down to is the instant gratification. The worst things I see, I would say, is huge car payments. I saw something, the average car payment nowadays, this might be specific to the US, is $700 plus a month. And when it comes to yeah,
Oh, wow.
I
Wow.
mean, I sit down with people all the time that have very
Oh,
like high income earning employees making 150, $200,000 a year and very smart people, but life just kind of catches up, right? They're spending $1,000 a month per kid on childcare. I mean, they both have brand new vehicles. They got every square foot of house. So I think kind of our generation and really how accessible everything is on social media, we want it and we want it now, right? Like the average home nowadays is so much larger than it used to be. I don't know the specific statistics, but just the square footage, the lifestyle creep. we're kind of keeping up with the Joneses, if you're familiar with that term, right? What are the neighbors
Yeah,
doing? So
yeah.
I think just that instant gratification and not planning for tomorrow. People have these huge homes, every square foot they can afford, and these huge vehicle payments, right? And again, it's they say vehicles are the worst investment you can make because it's not an investment, right? As soon as you
Mm,
drive a new vehicle off the lot, you're losing about 40% of the value generally. So instant gratification and people maybe not realizing that those older years are coming a lot faster than they think.
right. So so let's start there. How would you recommend that a person that's looking to attain a point at some point in their life, some financial freedom, how would you suggest they approach budgeting and spending and while still having a lifestyle for themselves?
Hmm. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is changing your mindset around it, right? Spending a little more time maybe on the discipline rather than on the social media. Because again, if you're spending a significant amount of time on social media, why would you be saving for the future? I mean, you see all kinds of things. You don't vote for one person, the world's going to end, right? All kinds of things out there. So why would you be saving for the future? So I think a good start would be reading. There's a book, Richest Man in Babylon. It's a fairly light read, and we need to change our mindset around investing. There's survivors and there's thrivers. Survivors do their spending again, Uber Eats a few times a week, all the vacations, and of course, the vehicle payments, where the thriver pays themselves first, right? So
Mm.
in most cases, that survivor, there's nothing left at the end of the month for them to be paying themselves or saving for the future, right? Now we can shift from one to the other, and it's about having that shift of mindset. So, Richest Man in Babylon, it's a fairly short read, and it's just about different relationships with money, and it's set in biblical times. I haven't read it for a while. I can't remember exactly why, but it's a good read and it's fairly light. So,
Right.
I don't want to be hypocritical either. I'm not perfect. I would say my guilty pleasure where I come fall short is certainly with the Uber Eats. That's a problem in my household. So it's a work in progress for me too, right?
Right, right, right. So I guess what I really want to know here is how do people balance? So obviously you want to be investing, and if you guys are not investing at home, learn about these things. like most people don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why investing is important. I mean, maybe you can touch on that a little bit because most people just think it stops at just saving, and they don't realize why investing is important.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. So again, everything's going to start with the saving, right? That's going to be step number one. We can't be building or growing our wealth if we're not saving our money, right? Unless you're
Right.
counting on inheritance from a relative or a lottery win, right?
Yeah.
So really what it comes down to is you got to be consistent and don't make yourself miserable to have a great retirement, right? We don't need to be on the Ichiban or the 99-cent ramen noodle diet, right? You need to find a bit of balance in your life. Some people do. I know some people that had extreme discipline throughout their entire life, and they have multi millions of dollars in retirement based on kind of more even modest salaries throughout their working years, and it's amazing. But I still don't see them doing much with it. But that's their money; they're free to do with it as they wish. Maybe there's some charities they want to take care of, but really, what it comes down to is I always tell people if you're not investing already, don't so much focus on a set dollar amount, maybe a set percentage. Putting away 10% every time we're paid is a great place to start. And with investing compound interest, if you're on the younger side, say you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, what you're going to see is even with more of a modest compound interest rate, your money's going to double multiple times from now towards that kind of financial freedom, whether it be 55 or 65, right? Now,
Yeah.
unless you're working with, say, a professional, if you're just looking on your own, investing doesn't need to be complex. I would say for the average person that's not looking to work with anyone, they just want something, put some money away and forget about it. Long term, I mean, you can't go wrong with a very basic index fund of like the S&P 500 or NASDAQ, right? Or combination of the two.
Yeah. But there's also the big thing, the big elephant in the room that most people miss, which is weird, is inflation, right? Because it's like you hold
Yeah.
cash, you hold cash, you hold cash for this amount of time, but it's losing value just sitting there in your bank account, right? That's a big thing that a lot of people miss. So, but anyway,
Mm-hmm.
that's that. But in terms of like debt management though. And you spoke about that a little bit with people buying cars that they cannot afford. You know, you're driving around that Bugatti just to make sure that your friends are like looking at you like, yo, this guy's balling out, but you're in debt. So I want you to kind of like address that in terms of obviously for different people, we're different in the sense that we have different things that we value. You know, you value your Uber Eats. I might value my, I don't know, $20 shoes or whatever. I don't know how, but my point is we all have stuff that we value, right? So how can people kind of balance what is worth, you know, like for me, for example, I might say, getting a car is worth getting into debt for. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. But
Mm-hmm.
some people might go, okay, not a car. I would never go into debt unless it's a house. That's how some people look at things. So I'm curious about debt management and how you kind of advise people on managing debt and what is worth going into debt for and what situations they can look to kind of leverage debt, for example.
Interesting. Okay, so when we're talking about debt, again, if you're living off of credit and any kind of purchase that is more of a want than a need, you can't afford it, right? If it's already coming from the negative. So with debt management, there's going to be different forms of debt, right? There's going to be good debt and bad debt. Something like a mortgage is generally considered good debt, right? We're building equity. Certainly a need. It's maybe a home we're living in. And again, we might even be renting it out. And when interest rates are, as they approach kind of normalcy here, we're going to be at a point again where that rent's going to be covering that mortgage payment every month, right? So there's definitely different forms of debt. Again, anytime, like if you're those predatory places, like payday loans, that's going to be a big no. Those places, you never want to step foot inside there. It's generally for people that are in a very bad spot in life, people that, of course, probably dealing with addiction or kind of lacking the literacy with handling their own money, right? So that's going to be pretty much the worst kind of debt, followed closely by credit cards. 90 to 21% compound interest is absolutely crippling. And why is it so high? Because credit cards are not meant for us to be paying debt, right? We're
Mm,
meant to pay them down at the end of every month. And that's really what it comes down to. And I mean, credit card debt, again, it's rampant in society. I mean, I see it every day. It affects millions of Canadians, and people tend to suffer in silence. It's a bit of a taboo subject. They think it's just them, but it's affecting their neighbors. It's affecting all kinds of people in their lives, but they suffer in silence, right? And it builds up very quickly. So a general recommendation is if people have credit card debt, what you want to do is set up a bit of an action plan, and consistency is going to be your best approach. One very easy tip is see if you can get a credit line at the bank to pay off that credit card, right? Because a credit card is generally about 90 to 21% compound interest, where a credit line nowadays you're looking at probably about 8 to 11% simple interest, right? So the interest is about half, and simple interest, of course, is just interest on top of the principal, where compound interest on the credit card is interest on top of interest. So that makes a big difference. So pay off that credit card with a credit line if you're able to. It'll make a huge difference to the interest you pay over time as you're consistent with, of course, your payments. Now, you mentioned something about as well, kind of leveraging debt. You could leverage debt in a variety of strategies with the real estate. Again, that's not really an area I would consider myself an expert, but there's a variety of things you can do there. You can
yeah.
also leverage debt with investing in the markets, which a lot of people don't realize is possible. Leveraged investing, of course. Again, it's not for everyone. There's risks associated to it, but generally you are investing. You're taking out some kind of loan from, say, the bank, and you're reinvesting that loan into the markets, right? Particularly advantageous when we're seeing kind of a lower rate environment, or they're more so kind of normal. Again, the last couple of years was not a good time for leverage investing because the lending rates were so high, right? But one thing a lot of people don't know is generally if you're investing a loan, it's tax deductible. So that interest payment, that what you paid in interest, you're going to be getting back at the end of the year, right? And generally, if you're investing in the markets, you're going to be able to get a better return.
Mm.
than whatever your interest was in the first place. And you're getting that interest back at the end of the year, right? Or
Yeah.
a majority of it anyways. But again, before you look into any leveraged investing, certainly talk to your accountant.
Interesting. 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 I didn't know that was tax deductible actually. That.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah,
But
definitely talk to your accountant before going ahead with anything like that, though.
yeah. So, let's talk about a topic that not a lot of people talk about, which is insurance, right? So, I want
Mm-hmm.
you to kind of break that down for us, for those of us who are not in that space. What are the critical spaces in people's lives that they should consider having insurance?
Yeah, this is often something that is missed, and there's a few reasons for that. Generally, when people are thinking about their own money or financial planning, they're thinking about the investments, right? It's a little sexier. What gets left by the wayside is generally the different aspects of protection. A lot of people have a decent idea of what's out there for different forms of investments, registered accounts. Most people aren't sitting around at coffee break talking about different aspects of protection, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's an equally important aspect of financial planning. So there's going to be main areas. Of course, a lot of people, when they think of like different kinds of insurance, they might just think of like term life insurance, right? Very basic. You pass away during that term, they're going to pay you out, right? But they don't realize we have term insurance and we have permanent coverage. Coverage that pays out for most companies over 99% of the time, no matter when we do pass away. And if we're still alive at the age of 100, it'll pay out.
Mm.
So with permanent insurance, there's living benefits to it, meaning that there's investments in there that we can utilize in a variety of aspects. So there's term insurance and there's a couple different kinds of permanent insurance on the life side. There's also critical illness coverage. Again, I'm a little more passionate about this than most people, but it's something I think everyone should have. If we're young and healthy, it costs roughly the price of a pack of cigarettes per month. And what does that look like? It's going to cover us for 1 to 2 years of expenses if we ever do get sick. If we ever have to live off of our investments or go into debt for a year or two, that can derail a financial plan by as much as a decade, right? When we think about
Right.
compound interest.
Right.
So it's in my opinion, a no-brainer to have some form of critical illness coverage, right?
Mm-hmm. Assuming a 20-year-old walks into your office and they're like, okay, I want to figure out this insurance business. So, I want to have some sort of insurance. I don't know why a 20-year-old would think about that because I don't know that they would in this generation. But let's assume like we have this really clever 20-year-old that walks into your office and they're like, well, I'm not married. I don't have kids, but I don't know how this insurance thing could help me. What do you suggest for them? What kind of approach do you kind of take when it comes to the insurance side?
No, I love that. And you're exactly right. Most 20-year-olds aren't looking at policies, but you'd be surprised. Some do see the value in it, and a lot of people actually get policies for their kids in childhood yet, right? And it's not necessarily for the death benefit. That's a little morbid, getting life insurance for a child. They do it for the cash values that the kids can utilize later in life, either for a home, for school, or even for something like that child's retirement, right? So I think the biggest things I would explain to someone who's young, who doesn't own a home, doesn't have kids yet, is get it while it's cheap, get it while we're still eligible. Well, of course, before something happens, right? You never know. I mean, some people get denied because they have a bad driving record, maybe a criminal record, or even family history, right? So get
Mm,
it while we're young, we're still eligible. Get it while it's cheap. Another one is, if anything ever happens, it certainly doesn't bring someone back, but it's helpful to leave something to the family. And the fourth reason is, why not, right? I
right.
recommend people get it while they're young and it's cheap, rather than waiting and kind of scrambling after they have kids and a mortgage, or maybe once something's going on with their health, right? That's another common thing. People have a health scare and then life insurance is a priority, right?
Mm. A lot of people have this belief that, well, insurance companies are always trying to scam you, which is this is how they make money. That's their business. So, so how do you kind of change the mindset so people are a bit more willing to get an insurance?
So yeah, and again, especially people coming with from other countries, do hold these skepticisms, because in some countries it is a bit of a scam, right? If we look at some places, maybe even Eastern Europe, I've heard a lot of horror stories. But most of the companies I work with here in Canada have been around for 100 years. Do you think any insurance company that survived two world wars, I'm pretty sure they're doing something right by their clients, right?
Right, right, right.
And I'll tell you too. I mean, I've been in the industry for a few years. I've seen several payouts. These companies are paying out, and I'll tell you, with permanent coverage, some of the companies I work with, they pay out over 99% of the time. The only way we are not getting paid out is if we committed fraud, if there was some lying on the application, if we died while committing a crime, say robbing a bank, we passed away during an act of war, say if we're serving in like the Ukrainian military, for example. And the fourth one is if we pass away by taking our own lives in the first 2 years that the policy's active. So
Wow.
those are kind of the four main ways we're not getting paid out on something like a permanent policy, right? So again, a lot of these top companies in Canada are paying out over 99% of the time. Once you've applied and you're accepted, that is the health they take into consideration, right? There's no post-death underwriting, whereas something with mortgage insurance there is. If we ever get mortgage insurance, a lot of the time the bank will do a post-death underwriting
Mm,
to kind of look for ways to not pay us. Whereas with your classic life insurance, that is not the case.
interesting, interesting. Okay, so I wanna, I did say I wanted to hear your story or you have a a Wolf of Wall Street story, and I was curious about that because you brought it up to me, which was kind of interesting because a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
people will kind of like hide away those details of themselves to prevent themselves from being judged. Why did you want to talk about this particular part of your life?
Like in regards to the addiction aspect,
Yes, yes, yes.
because I think that's my way of paying it forward, right? A lot of people were there and were honest with their own stories, and that's what helped me. And I think it's the least I can do is be vocal about it and let people know, if you're struggling, that I'm someone that's here to help you and I've been through it and I'm come out on the other side, right? With something like addiction, you're never cured, but I'll tell you, I'm living the life of my dreams now. And I mean, making a decision to go get help was probably the best thing I've ever done. And I am so grateful to be in a position where I had a lot of people in my corner, like friends and family, that supported me and helped me through that, right?
Interesting. So let's take it from the beginning. How did that get started?
I think the biggest thing is just addictive personality, kind of wanting to fit in, low self-esteem. Like there's no rhyme or reason just sitting there that would have said, hey, this kid's high risk, right? Both parents at home come from a comfortable middle class home. Not really like history of abuse, nothing like that. Like very normal childhood, wonderful parents, wonderful support systems. But I think things that maybe attributed to it was, I think, maybe low self-esteem to an extent, is, well, wanting to fit in and a bit of an addictive personality. Like, I mean, I started smoking weed at 16, and I think the first time I tried it, within a couple of weeks I was doing it every day, right? And it
Mm,
just continued to just continue to evolve. And addiction, that's what they say, it's a progressive disease, right? It just gets worse and worse, and that's really what happened. Like, I mean, I quickly moved on to harder and harder drugs, and I just kind of kept going through there. And again, like, I mean, when you're drinking and drugging and using substances, I mean, especially your adolescent years, like 16 and on, like those are key development years. Like, I just realized after a while, like, I just didn't know how to live right. I didn't
mm,
know how to effectively cope and handle my emotions or live normally, because I always used substances to kind of change my mood or help me cope with what was going on in life, right?
right. So I'm curious about that first experience of weed as you told me. Um, can you kind of paint me a picture, yeah, and tell me that story of, where you were and sort of the decisions that followed, because I think that frames things for people. before we kind of get into the turnaround.
Absolutely. So again, it's I think I'm in the 10th grade. It's May long weekend. That's a big deal when you're in grade 10, right? So I'm just out at a party and I don't know, there's a few people going to smoke a joint in someone's car. And I mean, I grew up in Saskatchewan too, right? So you got to remember parties are out in farmers fields and stuff like that, right? So
That's
I mean,
funny.
people are going to someone's car, someone has a joint, so I go with them. And again, I try that. And I don't remember really feeling anything or it being that special of an experience. But a few days later, it's like, hey, let's try that again. And I think within a couple weeks, I'm doing it every day. And I did it every day for years.
So the thing I was curious about there, when you said, oh, you went from one time to now you're doing it every day, I was kind of curious because a lot of scientists will tell you that marijuana is not addictive, right? It's not inherently addictive. It might be, you might form the habit, but it's not necessarily addictive. So I wonder
Mhm.
what your thoughts are. Obviously, you've experienced it, but why was it something that you started to do every day?
I think it was just, I liked how it made me feel. And it was just a bit of an escape from reality, right?
Okay.
Like when I first started, I mean, it was just having a good time and nothing was wrong. I think, obviously, like it really progressed, and the jury's kind of out on marijuana, right? It affects people completely differently. Some people can do it regularly and not have adverse effects on their life, and some people it's really harmful to. Like, and I don't think anyone in high school should be smoking weed either, right? Because again, it's those are key development years, and I'm no I'm no doctor or scientist. I don't think it's doing you any good if you're doing it in those times, right? So I would say for me, like it just progressed, and I mean, addiction was adamant, right? Because it was fun at first, and after a while, it would just make me very critical, paranoid, and I still did it for years.
Wow.
Like it's one of those things. It affects people very differently. Some people, like you see on the cartoons, they're giggly and laughy. Like I'm just like looking around, like it was fun for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'm
So
just like
fun.
hyper aware for the next couple hours. Like it's just like I remember maybe 19 or 20. I had gone through a rough breakup and I went to a doctor and I kind of told him about my weed usage and like it was tough love I need. He's like why the F are you doing this to yourself? Like he let me have it and I kind of went straight there. He recommended I read The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck, which is still
Right.
one of the best books I've ever read. And it
Right.
really helped me and I was good for a few months. And again, it's just, I have that history over probably for a good decade of just always all these consequences wanting to stop my usage and maybe getting a few weeks, a month or two under my belt and just going back and kind of just blowing up my life, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just didn't really know how to live or how to stop.
So a lot of people speak about the difficulty in quitting drugs once you start, right? But before we get into that, actually, I want to hear about how that. Obviously, it's one thing to do weed. I interviewed a guy a while ago, and he was telling me it was basically like, oh, if my kid tells me they have to do drugs, I'll be like, oh no. I think what he was saying was between smoking a cigarette and doing weed, he was like, you know what, just do weed. Like it's harmless. All
Hmm.
that was the way he painted that to me. Well, relatively harmless, right?
Yeah.
So how does that transition to hard drugs for you?
So that's kind of the thing too, is like I think again, don't quote me. What we know from science, I do think cigarettes are probably more harmful than weed. But again, cigarettes aren't sending you into psychosis though either, right? So I think there's going to be harms to both of them. And again, I think they're finding a lot of good health benefits to marijuana, but it's not something that did me any good in my personal experience. Okay. So they view it as a gateway drug because again, it's generally where people start, right? And that's what happened with me in my own personal experience was it just wasn't enough after a while. I wanted to try other things. And I've tried pretty much everything under the sun. And again, it's I don't know, like you once you come into recovery and you kind of own up, you get past the point of thinking your problems and you're this unique flower, right?
Mm.
Anyone that goes into seeking help, like that's part of my story and how I ended up in BC 4 years ago was I came here for treatment, and everyone in a treatment or a rehab facility just thinks they are a special flower. They are so unique, but you realize once you start talking to people and you take a bit of responsibility for your life, you
Right.
realize that there's a lot of overlap in these stories, right? You are
Mm.
not that special and you need to get past that. Again, everyone has a past. They have traumas. And again, I'm whatever might have happened to you, I'm sorry, but you need to work on that. You need to take ownership for maybe what's happened in our lives, right?
Right. So so you moved to you got to a point, and how old were you when you got into hard drugs?
Oh, Lordy. Like 17, maybe. I think no, 16. This is a weird one for you. The first night, and this isn't going to be a common thing you hear. The first night I tried weed, this is again the people pleasing kind of thing, right? The first night I tried weed, it was a fairly large gathering or party, and a lot of people had gone home, and this guy kind of calls me over. To a bush and he pulls out MDMA, and I didn't even know what MDMA was. It's kind of it's like what was common in like the 90s and 2000s. It's essentially ecstasy. And
Mm-hmm.
he offered me to try it, and like I was terrified, and I still tried it, right? The people pleasing. The first night I tried marijuana, I tried ecstasy.
Wow.
So weird, right?
Wow.
So again, it's just the people pleasing. Like it's not like I was excited to do it. It was just an older kid, and I mean, I was terrified, but I did it. Like
Wow.
so, just the need to fit in. I think so. Again, I'm working at a grocery store, and like I didn't have money, but like we had maybe like me and like a friend, we had maybe like put in $50 each and go try like cocaine or something. And like again,
Wow.
anyone who's selling cocaine, especially to children, probably isn't a great person. And I don't think we were doing very pure or imported stuff, right? It probably just absolute garbage. But again, I was trying these things in high school, right? And even when I was kind of started smoking weed regularly, I was hanging out with a lot of older kids. Before that, I was playing a lot of Xbox, hanging out with great friends my own age, and I kind of abandoned them in a sense and started hanging out with older kids. And I remember my parents were so against the weed, and they kind of realized what I was doing, and I got in quite a bit of trouble with them. And one of my good friends from childhood told me, first it's going to be your parents, and next it's going to be the police. And I'm like, okay, okay. Within a couple months, they catch us smoking weed out in the prairies. That's again, you're in small towns. You head out in like a farmer's field and indulge. And yeah, so I had that, and then before I turned 20, I was um, I was charged with like driving or intoxicated 3 times. I
Wow.
haven't had any run-ins or tickets over the last more than a decade, but two driving infractions for impairment at 17 and one at 19. Again,
Wow.
I just the foreshadowing. He was so right. First it's your parents, then it's going to be the police, and that was the big separator. A lot of other kids were doing stuff I was doing, but they knew when to shut it down, and they didn't have the consequences.
Mm. Interesting. So I'm curious about like getting working while still, you're still using at this point, but now you're working. And I wanted to kind of get a sense of what that was like.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you, for a lot of people, they expect like hard drugs will put you in a situation where, everybody can tell, you can see it on you. But my understanding was that's not the way your story went. Like
Mm-hmm.
you were, straight as an arrow in the face of people, but at the same time you still had this addiction problem. So I wanted to kind of get a lay of how that worked.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even it all started when I started smoking weed in high school, like every day. I just, for probably a decade, I kind of lived a double life, right? I will start with high school. Like I always just really cared what people thought about me. So In school, I'm more of kind of that preppy kid, but then there I am out at lunchtime smoking weed in the parking lot and with the stoners, right? And again, like I cared so much what people thought. The rest of them are just walking to school and they don't really care, but I'm like terrified. I'm like, don't be blowing that on me. And like I'm putting in the Visine, like the drops for red eyes and stuff like that, making sure I'm aired out. Like I just cared so much what people thought about me, right? So I'm kind of this preppy kid, and then the evenings and weekends, I'm a drug user, right? And that continued through university. I mean, university, I was involved in extracurriculars, and I mean, I did what I had to get by. I didn't have phenomenal grades in school, but I did what I had to get by. And again, kind of live that double life, right? Like, I mean, the weekends is really when I would indulge, and I mean, sometimes it'd creep into the weekdays, and it was the same thing once I was an employee as well, right?
Mm.
I was like when I was big into the marijuana, I was a daily user, but I was never really a daily user with like drinking or the hard drugs, right? I was a
Oh,
binge user.
oh, I
I
see, I
would
see.
be good for a week or two, and then I mean, Friday would come around, and I would just say like, I'm not doing drugs this weekend, and then you get a few drinks in me, and then there we go. And I mean, that Friday night would creep into a Sunday, and I mean, over the last year or two before I got help, I mean, that's Friday night was creeping into a Monday or a Tuesday.
Wow.
So I was always very kind and really cared of what people thought about me. Like, but I mean, I was a good employee when I was at work, but oh my Lord, could I take a sick day?
Man's a sick day warrior.
Yeah, I'm a sick day warrior. I would miss so many Mondays and Tuesdays. And I
Yeah,
mean, like, again, you're doing drugs over the weekend. Everything's great. Nothing's wrong. But once you're coming down, just the level of anxiety, like waking up on a Monday or a Tuesday and it's time to go to work, just how terrified I would be of the world. Just crippling anxiety, right?
right. So, what would you say were the triggers for those moments where you got like what was the trigger? What would make you just crave the? I mean, I don't know if it figures the same as like hunger in the sense that like oh you can tell I've never tried hard drugs because of the way I'm asking you these questions.
Let's keep it that way.
I know, right? But my curiosity here is, does it work like hunger in the sense that okay, I'm just suddenly I want, like, it's the way my body works now. I just want hard drugs. Is that
Hmm.
the way it worked, or what's the trigger?
That's a really good question. So I'll give you a couple things on that one. So I had gone to detox a couple times as well. For anyone who doesn't know, treatment is where you really put work into yourself, rehab or treatment. You put work into yourself. You maybe write the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's more like putting work into yourself and looking towards recovering. Detox is somewhere where you go for maybe 10 days to 2 weeks. And it's just about drying out, getting a few good meals in you, kind of getting a bit of sobriety, a little bit of clarity, getting your health back so you can go into a treatment program. So no one stays sober or clean after going to detox. They need some
Mm,
change. They need to go to treatment. But
interesting.
I went to detox a couple times, and the one of the things I remember is if you're having cravings, there's an acronym HALT. Kind of stop and think, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? And it's almost always one of those four.
Oh, interesting.
Another thing I can give you as well is people, places, and things. You need to make some major changes if you want to live a new life and find recovery. I tried so many times hanging out with the same people, going to the same places. Maybe I would just be taking a night off. I'd be smoking cigarettes or drinking coffee or something while they're all drinking and doing whatever. That's not how it works. You need to change your associations, whether that be people, places, and things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, you need to make major changes in your life and learn how to live. And of course, when it comes to other triggers, I would say, I mean, just having a bad day, like maybe I'm feeling down on myself, maybe failure, maybe someone didn't treat me well, or I deem they didn't treat me well. So again, it's just kind of
Yeah,
having that in my mind, kind of like an F it and let's kind of burn it down again, right?
right. So I'm curious about. obviously you've been in corporate a while now, and I'm curious about how that culture of corporate. A lot of people paint, if you follow if we're still following the Wolf of Wall Street premise there, a lot of people deem corporate as this sort of this pressure cooker that, and sometimes there's that again the same pressure you talked about to fit in there that kind of pushes people towards addiction.
Yeah, I just kind of know what my environments are. Like, I just know that's not my world anymore, right? Like, you can't get complacent and think you're cured or anything like that. Like I'll tell you, if I went back to, if I had a drink, I'm sure maybe I could do it once. It would be okay. But I'm going to be right back in the same spot, probably worse off, right? So by no means do I think I'm ever going to be cured or anything like that. Like, I'm a recovering addict, and that's what it is. So I would say for probably my first year recovery, you really got to watch where you're going. Nowadays, like I can be around people drinking, but I know when it's time to go home.
Oh, I see.
I'm not someone that's going to go to a club. It's just it never really was my scene to begin with. But I'm not someone that's going to go to a club. I'm not someone that's going to be out, barring a really special occasion past midnight. Like you can kind of tell is someone who's in recovery. You can kind of tell once you see people kind of loosening up, having a few drinks. If you're out at dinner or something, you know when it's your cue to leave.
Right. So what I'm curious about is that moment where you kind of realize, I need to, this is because here's the thing, in the modern world that we live in, people indulge, drugs are
Mm-hmm.
advertised as fun and, kids younger are trying drugs. The other day I saw on the news a 13-year-old, I think it was, overdosed, and I was like, what the hell am I listening to? Like,
Wow.
how is a 13-year-old, doing that much? Well, you don't, now it doesn't even take that much anymore, right? With the toxic drug uh crisis that we're having. So for me, it was like, I'm curious, what was that moment that you realized that, you know what, this is not for me anymore?
Yeah, no, happy to jump into that. So I think the biggest thing, if you or anyone you know is struggling, you can't do it for them, right? They need to make that decision and kind of find their rock bottom or their time to change. Like, I mean, my parents tried to help me for so many years and tried to do it for me, but I wasn't ready, right? So after I think my third DUI, um, my mom took me to treatment and like I just wasn't ready. I think I stayed for a few hours and she came and picked me up and it was a tough car ride home. I'll tell you that for free, but you need to decide when it's time for you. So when I had lived in the last job I was working in Saskatchewan, I was living in the largest city in Saskatchewan. I was living in Saskatoon, working a job I loved. This kind of tells you where I was at in my life. Um, I was doing very good at my job. I was the first one in the office in the morning, last one out at night, and I just remember like the cleaners coming in every evening at probably 6:30, and I'm one of the few people in the office, and I'm like, oh shit, I gotta go home. All I was doing was working, going home, watching Netflix, eating, going to bed, unless I was using drugs on the weekends and into the weekdays, right? I just didn't know how to live anymore. Like, I think when work's just your happy place and you're scared to go home, there's a lot going on in your life, right? I
Mm.
didn't have the coping skills, didn't know how to live anymore, right? So, really, what it came to was I had moved in with a friend who was in recovery as well, and we're supposed to be kind of living clean together, right? And I had a couple months originally, but by the time we moved in together, like I was the worst I ever was, right? Like the night we moved in together, I was fine already. So we lived together, and I think it was like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and he knew I wasn't doing good. He came in my room and said like, he knew I wasn't doing good, but I had borrowed money from him and some kind of lie I told him, and he asked for it back, and I just told him I could. Oh, addicts are creative. Addicts are creative, manipulative, and creative. So he asked for the money back, and I just told him like, hey man, like I might need a bit of time. And he's just like, yeah, I kind of know what's going on with you. Is it okay if I mention to your parents that maybe I think it's a good idea for you to go where I went to clean up? And I just said like, whatever, go for it. And then my parents like called me, mentioned it to me, and I just kind of laughed. And I'm just like, yeah, okay. And then a few hours later, I just kind of came to a realization like, wait a minute, it's Tuesday or Wednesday. You're sitting here Googling symptoms for a disease you made up that you told work about on why you haven't been there yet this week. Maybe it's time to make some changes. So I yeah, I kind of made that decision. And I mean, like, I'm just so blessed. So many people don't have the resources or the support in their lives. They're on their own. And I always had a family and a lot of good friends that never gave up on me. I
Yeah,
mean, it's one of those things. I'm the furthest thing from self-made. You know what I mean? There's so many people that have gotten me over so many hurdles in life and that have helped me. So, what had happened was, again, I decided, hey, I'm going to treatment. I'm never using drugs again. So, what do you think I'm doing? One last hurrah, right? I'm supposed to go to this treatment center out in BC in the next couple of days. So, I'm just consuming drugs to the best of my abilities. And then, yeah, very, very inspiring. So then I'm supposed to go in a few days. So my parents come and get me from Saskatoon, take me back to my hometown. And then I just was supposed to go the next day, and they had a COVID lockdown at this treatment center I was supposed to go to. So I laid in bed and watched series and ate for probably a week or 10 days just at my parents' house. And then the Super Bowl was coming up, and I manipulated my parents and letting me go back to Saskatoon. I just kind of told them that I was had to go see some friends because I wouldn't see them for a long time. But I had it all prepared. Like, I mean, pulling money off credit cards and stuff like that. And like, they took my credit cards, and obviously I knew a few more tricks that you can be transferring money off them and stuff like that. There's all
wow,
kinds of junky tricks you can utilize.
wow.
A lot of them I didn't even know about, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, so I went back up there and had a probably a good 2 week run, like, and then finally went to treatment. And I mean, yeah, I obviously had some debts to pay off, because obviously I racked up quite the tab over those couple weeks, right? So I think the biggest thing that was kind of a long answer is just you got to be ready. And again, you can't do it for someone, right?
Mm.
They need to come to that own realization.
You obviously spoke about the supports that you had there, and it sounds like your parents were and your friends there were really helpful, and they really kind of like got you there. And for you, and I think you shouldn't sort of give up the how do I say, the accolades there, because I mean, if you're gone, there's many people that went to recovery and it didn't stick, right? And for you, it looks like it has stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a lot of like personal, like a lot of resilience, a lot of determination within yourself to keep that going, right? That's just, I don't think you can kind of discount that. So I thought I'd mention that because I saw how you were just giving away all the goodies. Like, oh, you guys did that for me, you did that for me. Like, no, as you say, it is a personal thing in the end. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious though. We live in a generation now where, you know, like with the opioid crisis as it is, let me make that question a bit simpler. With the opioid crisis as it is,
Mm-hmm.
with kids now, as they always have, indulging in drugs more and more, especially as they kind of relate with friends and stuff like that. For a long time, I always thought, oh, you know what? If a person is addicted, maybe at some point they made this decision to go into drugs. But with the kids that are coming up now, they're being exposed to drugs before they're ready. They're in these situations, and for like for you, for example, the situation could have gone very badly. You could have really got hooked on something crazy, like and
Mm-hmm.
and so like, what can we as a society do to kind of help the next generation? Because we certainly can't continue like this. Like, we're the most mentally ill that we've always been in the world at the moment. We're in
Yeah.
a very very painful time in the world right now. So I want to understand. Obviously, again, this is an experience that you've had. How can we as a society be there for the younger generation?
Oh, it's tough. That's a phenomenal question. But again, like what you see with social media and technology nowadays, we are more connected than ever, but we're more isolated than ever, right? And again, addiction's more of a spiritual disease. And I mean, a lonely addict is a dangerous thing, right? It's because I mean, your mind starts running, right? Like I'm very stable in my recovery. Like it's always going to be a day at a time, but I'll even think like the odd night where maybe my girlfriend's out and it's just me. I'm just like, it's my addict brain. I'm like, I don't seriously entertain it. I'm like, oh, who would know? Who would know, right? So it's one of those things is we need the connection, and like it's just such an interesting thing. Like I went to treatment about 4 years ago, and I can think of 6 to 8 of them off the top of my head. Buddies I went through with that are dead now, opiate users, because of
Mm,
the toxic drug supply. I mean, when it was heroin, um, overdose was very rare. But the heroin, I don't even think you can get heroin anymore. Heroin's been replaced with fentanyl because
mm,
it's a lot easier for the cartels to distribute, right? Because it's about 100 times more potent, right? So it's a lot easier and more cost effective for them to be moving around, right? So I think it's in the last like 8 to 10 years where it's like here in BC, like I'm not sure if it was this year or last year, but like well over like 3,000 people dead, right?
yeah.
It's just terrible. And there's just so many different things. And what sucks is it's become a political thing, right? One side says safe supply, where we reduce the harm, or what they call harm reduction, I should say, is where they reduce the harm. They have places for people to use their drugs. They might even supply them drugs at certain places. They have Narcan kits ready to go in case people do overdose. Then there's the other side, which is recovery, where of course you have that position where you're sending people out to treatment to actually get help so they can change. And again, the odds of someone staying clean long term after going to treatment are fairly low. I mean, I know several people that are wonderful members of the community. They have decade or more clean, and they've been to treatment a dozen, 2 dozen times, right? So lots of people, most people, it's not going to be a one and done, right? They're going to have to go several times. And I think in a lot of places, the harm reduction's winning because it's a lot cheaper to just kind of keep people high than it is to help them change.
Interesting. So I wonder where you land on that argument. Obviously, you talked about how it's gotten political. It's almost a debate
Mm-hmm.
between involuntary treatment, as it was in the current BC in the last BC election here, where a certain party was kind of like championing involuntary treatment, and the other party
Yeah.
was for a long time. I don't think that's their current stance, but for a long time they were
Mm-hmm.
championing safe supply and harm reduction and that kind of stuff. Where do you land on that argument? What do you think
Yeah.
is potentially more helpful to people that are stuck in a cycle of addiction?
So it's very stark. Like, I mean, one side is a very left leaning on the political ideology. The other side is very right leaning. It's just interesting how it's been politicized, right? But in my opinion, and I'm a pretty moderate person, and it kind of fits on that one too. I think there should be a combination of both. First of all, what you and I have talked about on people getting clean, they need to be ready. I don't think like a jail format or mandatory treatment's going to work for everyone. What a waste of resources. I can't imagine what the study would be on that, what the odds someone would be of staying clean after mandatory treatment, right? So I think we need a bit of both, the harm reduction, so we can actually keep people alive until they are ready for, of course, being in a position to one actually seek out treatment, and then obviously the treatment there for when they need it. Because again, that's how people are going to change. And treatment's not part of everyone's story, but I think it's going to be the most effective outlet, right? So I think we need a bit of both. If I had to pick just one, I would definitely say the treatment route, because again, harm reduction is exactly that. It's just lowering the harm. It's
Hmm.
not going to save people. It's just going to keep them high and keep them alive, right? So I would say a combination of both, but I know what saved me and changed my life.
Yeah. Okay. So as we kind of wind to the end here, I want us to kind of tie this up a little bit. So we're in the middle of, and I'll bring it back to the finance picture because we're in the middle of an affordability crisis right now, and a lot of people are stuck in these kind of really bad situations at the moment where it's like, okay, how can I even afford to live? How can I like have some sort of lifestyle? And obviously that you're seeing that kind of spill into the fact that a lot of young people are just like I'm not gonna get married. I'm not gonna have kids. I'm not gonna do any of that stuff. But my question for you is, as we round up here, what is the for a young person growing up right now, or no, no, I wouldn't say growing up, but for a young person just coming into a career, they're starting to be independent. Say they're 19 or 20 or whatever. What is the biggest advice you would recommend for a person who wants to get to a point in wants to get attain some decent financial freedom? And I'm not talking retirement here. I'm talking they want to make a good life for themselves in the
Mm-hmm.
future.
Start investing as soon as you can. And again, sometimes we need others for that discipline, right? Generally, that tax-free savings account is going to be your best friend as an everyday investor. Most provinces, once you're 18, you can open it. I believe here in BC, it is 19 actually. But
Hmm.
once you can open it, start using that TFSA. Unless you're going to be talking to a professional, just buy low-fee index funds like the S&P 500. Put away very modest amounts. Time in the market and compound interest is going to be your best friend as an everyday investor. Maybe even give a family member the login so you're not tempted. I mean, when I was in my early 20s, I had invested several times and I'd end up blowing it. And again, that was kind of part of the whole addiction thing, right? But
Right.
again, if you can start with very modest amounts, like 25, $50 a month, right? It's amazing what happens to that money over time. You have such a leg up if you can start investing in your early 20s. It's absolutely amazing what time in the market does for
Okay. So my final question for you is, what do you think about meme coins and meme stocks? Now,
that.
I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. But actually, what I wanted to ask, I was curious about like cryptocurrencies and how. What do you see for the future of cryptocurrencies?
That's hilarious. Yeah, I haven't checked my Shiba Inu for a while. I don't think it's doing too well.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people that are actually and like really excited for the future of what crypto can be, and I wonder
Hmm.
how you view that. Do you consider that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, when everyone was buying in what was that, late 2021 or 2020 2021, I think. And I mean, like, I bought in, I put a few grand in it. Last time I looked, that few grand's worth a couple $100. So it's
Ooh,
one of those things. I think it was, yeah, and that's a common story you'll hear. A lot of
yeah.
people are down 90% plus, but I think it was just a little too early. And there's rule number one of investing: you don't invest in something you don't understand. Anytime I was buying something, I'm on the phone with a friend talking me through all these different wallet keys and how to buy it and paying the gas fees. Like, I didn't understand it at all, and that should be kind of rule number one. And a lot of the coins I bought didn't have a practical use, right? It was just kind of a fad or a meme coin. So it's not really something I advise on or recommend. Generally, my recommendation to people is, if they're really set on it, is don't put in more money than you're willing to lose, and no more than 5 to 10% of your total investment portfolio. So I think if you're going to be investing in cryptocurrency, like things like Ethereum, Bitcoin, Solana, I don't think those are going anywhere. Those might be a decent one, and there's actually, like, it's gaining ground with the regulators too. Like, there's mutual funds you can actually buy nowadays that. What's held in the mutual fund is different blockchain technologies and a portion of it Bitcoin, right? So it's coming around. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think Bitcoin's almost like a futuristic gold because it is a limited
Hmm.
resource. So again, it's not something I understand at an expert level, or something that I put a ton of money into myself. But again, don't put in more money than you're willing to lose, is a general recommendation.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good place to hang this. Thank you so much for your time
I
today,
love it.
Chandler. And I really appreciate you just being so generous with your time and sharing your story as well. Because I know for one you didn't have to do that. But I'm glad you shared that, and I'm sure there will be people who are impacted positively by your story. So thank you for sharing your time with me today.
I sure hope so. Again, yeah, I'm grateful for the time as well, my friend. Always enjoy our time together. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For you guys at home, if you're new around here, don't forget to subscribe. And if you guys have questions for Chandler, put them in the chat, okay? Put them in the chat. Maybe we can pull him in to come and answer your questions. Ask me anything if you like.
I love it.
Anyways, see you guys next time. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wolf of Young Street podcast. If you derived value from this podcast, please don't forget to subscribe. I would love to hear from you as well. So please comment your thoughts down below.